What if a perfect murder was built on the foundation of a harmless lie? A terrified singer plans a simple deception to win her freedom from a cruel patron, but in the shadows of Blackwood Manor, a killer sees their chance, turning her clever trick into a perfect murder. Now, with everyone a suspect and every alibi built on a lie, a question arises: who heeded her enough to silence her song? Or who loved her secrets enough to kill to protect them?
Chapter 1. An Invitation to Blackwood Manor. It is a curious facet of human nature, I have often observed, that an unexpected summons can inspire both a thrill of excitement and a deep-seated sense of unease. Such was the case with the letter that arrived at my modest London flat on a dreary Tuesday morning in late October. The envelope was of a heavy, cream-colored stock, the sort of stationery that speaks of old money and established tradition. The postmark was from some unpronounceable hamlet in the Scottish Highlands, and the address was written in a spidery, assertive hand that I vaguely recognized. Inside, the message was brief, almost unnervingly so. My dear Captain Hastings, I find myself in need of a man of sound judgment and steady nerve. Your name came to mind. I should be most grateful if you would join me for a small weekend party at Blackwood Manor beginning this Friday. The matter is of some delicacy. A car will meet the 4:15 train from King's Cross at Invergarry Station. Yours, etc., Sir Alastair Finch. Sir Alastair Finch. I had to rack my brains for a moment. I knew the name, of course. Who in England did not? Finch Industries had built half the ships that plied the Empire's trade routes. He was a titan of industry, a man spoken of in the same hushed, respectful tones as Rockefeller or Carnegie, though he had in recent years retreated entirely from public life, becoming something of a myth. I had been introduced to him once, a fleeting handshake at the Carlton Club years ago. He had been a formidable figure then, with eyes like chips of granite and a presence that seemed to fill the room. Why on earth would such a man summon me? The phrase "steady nerve" sent a familiar tingle down my spine. It was the sort of language that my dear friend Hercule Poirot would appreciate. Indeed, my first instinct was to show him the letter. But Poirot was away, engaged in some trifling matter of state importance in Geneva, and was not due back for a fortnight. He would, I knew, scold me for my impulsiveness, for rushing headfirst into a situation without due consideration. "Ah, my dear Hastings, you have the heart of a romantic and the mind of a charging bull. It is a dangerous combination." And yet, the prospect was too tempting. A weekend in a Scottish manor, a mysterious, delicate matter, and the company of the great Sir Alastair Finch. It was precisely the sort of adventure I had been craving to lift the oppressive gloom of the London autumn. I packed my bags that very afternoon. The journey north was as grim as the London weather I had left behind. The train rattled through a landscape that grew progressively wilder and more desolate. The gentle, rolling hills of England gave way to the stark, brooding mountains of Scotland, their peaks shrouded in a persistent mist. Rain lashed against the window of my compartment, blurring the view of endless brown bracken and dark, forbidding lochs. It was a landscape that seemed to hold its secrets close. By the time the train wheezed into the tiny windswept station of Invergarry, dusk was already falling. A biting wind swept along the platform, and I was glad of my thick tweed coat. A solitary car, a grand and gleaming Rolls-Royce that looked entirely out of place in such rustic surroundings, was waiting. The chauffeur, a silent, grim-faced man named MacLeod, took my bags without a word and held the door open. The drive to Blackwood Manor took the best part of an hour along a narrow, winding road that climbed ever higher into the hills. The house, when it finally appeared, was a silhouette against the bruised purple sky. It was a vast, Gothic pile of granite, all turrets and gables, a fortress built to withstand the ravages of time and the even harsher Scottish weather. Lights gleamed from a few downstairs windows, but the rest of the edifice was dark, its stone walls seeming to absorb the last of the day's light. As we crunched up the gravel drive, I confess my initial excitement was tempered by a growing sense of foreboding. The place did not feel welcoming. It felt like a prison. A stern-looking butler with an air of profound disapproval ushered me into a cavernous great hall. A magnificent fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the house. Dark tapestries depicting grim hunting scenes lined the walls, and the heads of various unfortunate stags gazed down with glassy-eyed indifference. "Captain Hastings," the butler announced, his voice echoing in the rafters. From a high-backed armchair near the fire, a figure rose slowly. I had prepared myself for the formidable man I remembered, but Sir Alistair Finch was much changed. He was stooped and frail, his once powerful frame now gaunt beneath a velvet smoking jacket. Yet his eyes, when they met mine, were as sharp and piercing as ever. "Hastings, good of you to come," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He gestured with a skeletal hand towards the others assembled in the room. "Allow me to introduce my fellow inmates." It was a strange choice of words, and it hung in the air as he made the introductions. First was his wife, Lady Beatrice Finch. She was a generation younger than her husband, a statuesque beauty with hair the color of spun gold and eyes the shade of a summer sky. But her beauty was marred by a palpable tension, her fingers constantly toying with the pearls at her throat. She seemed less a wife and more a beautiful, caged bird. Next was Julian Finch, Sir Alistair's nephew, and, I presumed, his heir. He was handsome in a slick, predatory way, with dark, restless eyes and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to his face. He shook my hand with a grip that was a little too firm, a little too eager. "A pleasure, Captain," he said. "Always good to have a new face. Things can get a little repetitive here." He cast a sideways glance at his uncle, a glance that held a clear note of impatience. Standing slightly apart from the family was a severe-looking man in his late 40s, introduced as Dr. Arbuthnot, Sir Alistair's personal physician. He gave me a curt nod, his expression unreadable behind thick spectacles. He had the air of a man who guarded his patient jealously. In a shadowed corner, almost blending into the dark wood paneling, was a quiet, mousy woman named Eleanor Vance. She was, Sir Alistair explained with a dismissive wave, Lady Beatrice's companion. She murmured a greeting, her eyes darting away as soon as they met mine. She seemed to be a creature of the shadows, content to be overlooked. But the final guest was the most surprising of all, he said, a strange, almost feverish light in his eyes. And our guest of honor, Miss Genevieve Croft. The name, of course, was legendary. Genevieve Croft, the English nightingale, was the most celebrated soprano of her generation. Her voice was said to be a thing of divine beauty, capable of moving men to tears. I had seen her perform once at Covent Garden and had been utterly captivated. But the woman who now turned to acknowledge me was not the radiant diva I remembered from the stage. She was painfully thin, her face pale and drawn. Her large, dark eyes were filled with a profound and unmistakable fear. She looked less like a guest of honor and more like a sacrificial lamb. What on earth was she doing here, in this grim, isolated house, surrounded by this strained and unhappy assembly? The tension in the room was as thick and suffocating as the peat smoke from the fire. Dinner was a stilted, uncomfortable affair, served in a dining room that could seat 50 but felt crowded with just the 7 of us. The conversation was forced, punctuated by long, awkward silences. Julian attempted to engage me in talk of stocks and shares, while Lady Beatrice asked polite but mean.
Chapter 2. A Song Unsung. The silence in the music room was absolute. It was a weighted, expectant silence, heavier than any sound. Outside, the storm threw itself against the granite walls of the manor with the fury of a living beast, the wind shrieking through the eaves like a chorus of damned souls. But within that room, the storm was forgotten. Every atom of attention was focused upon the small, pale figure of Genevieve Croft as she stood beside the polished black bulk of the grand piano. Her accompanist, a nervous young man who had been imported for the occasion and had barely spoken a word all evening, sat with his fingers poised over the keys. He glanced at her, awaiting his cue. Miss Croft took a small, steadying breath. She placed one hand upon the piano's edge as if for support, and with the other she lifted a glass of water that had been placed there for her. She took a delicate, bird-like sip, her throat moving as she swallowed. Then she set the glass down with a faint click that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. She closed her eyes for a moment, a painter preparing her canvas. We all leaned forward, a captive audience held in thrall, not by the promise of her talent, but by the raw, palpable terror that radiated from her. Sir Alister's eyes burned with a proprietary fire, his frail body rigid with anticipation. He was a collector, about to behold his most priceless acquisition perform its singular, wondrous trick. Miss Croft opened her mouth. The accompanist's fingers descended, and the first gentle notes of a Schubert lieder bloomed in the air. The sound was beautiful, pure, a fragile island of harmony in a sea of tension. For that one fleeting second, I believed the dreadful premonition that had gripped me was nothing more than my own foolish fancy. But the famous golden voice never came. From Genevieve Croft's throat there issued not a note of music, but a dreadful, strangled gasp. It was a sound of shock and utter confusion, a sound that clawed at the air. Her eyes flew open, wide and staring, not at us, but at some unseen internal horror. Her hand flew to her neck, her fingers clawing at the delicate skin as if to pluck out some invisible obstruction. The accompanists playing faltered, collapsing into a discordant clatter of keys. She took a stumbling step forward, away from the piano, her body lurching with a convulsive shudder. A terrible, guttural noise escaped her lips. Her face, as already pale, took on a dreadful bluish tinge around the mouth. She was like a marionette whose strings had been abruptly severed. She swayed for a moment, her gaze sweeping across our horrified faces with a look of frantic, uncomprehending appeal. Then, with a final sighing exhalation of breath, she collapsed. She fell not gracefully, but with the dead weight of finality, her fine silk gown crumpling around her on the rich Persian rug. For a heartbeat, no one moved. We were frozen, an audience to a tragedy far more real than any opera. Then Lady Beatrice screamed. It was a sharp, piercing shriek of pure hysteria that shattered the spell. The room erupted into chaos. Julian Finch was the first to react, leaping from his chair. "Good God!" he exclaimed, rushing towards the fallen singer. Dr. Arbuthnot moved with a swift, professional urgency that belied his earlier stiffness. "Stay back, all of you," he commanded, his voice a sharp crack of authority. He pushed past Julian and kneeled beside Miss Croft's still form. I stood up, my own heart hammering against my ribs. Sir Alistair had not moved. He remained in his chair, his body as rigid as stone, his face a mask of disbelief that was rapidly curdling into a terrifying, cold fury. His masterpiece had been shattered before his very eyes. Eleanor Vance, I noted, with a strange sense of detachment, had risen and gone to Lady Beatrice, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. Miss Vance's face was, as ever, a placid and unreadable blank. Dr. Arbuthnot's hands were methodical and sure. He felt for a pulse at the singer's neck, then at her wrist. He gently tilted her head back, trying to listen for any sign of breath. The seconds stretched into an eternity, marked only by the howling of the wind and Lady Beatrice's muffled sobs. Finally, the doctor looked up. His face was grim, his expression devoid of any hope. "He's gone," he said, his voice flat and heavy. "There is nothing I can do. She is dead." Dead. The word landed in the room with the finality of a coffin lid closing. The English nightingale, whose voice had enchanted thousands, was dead on the floor of a Scottish music room. A seizure? Her heart? She looked so fragile. The stress of it all. Julian asked, his voice strained. "It's possible," Arbuthnot conceded, his eyes still fixed on the body. "A sudden cardiac arrest brought on by extreme anxiety is not out of the question." Sir Alistair finally found his voice. It was a low, venomous hiss. "Anxiety? Nonsense! The woman was a performer. She lived for this. Someone has done this. Someone has robbed me." His accusation was general, yet it felt intensely personal, as if each of us was being individually condemned. Dr. Arbuthnot ignored him. He continued his examination, his brow furrowed in concentration. He gently touched the singer's face, noting the pronounced cyanosis around her lips. His gaze then traveled from the body to the piano and to the small, elegant glass of water that had been placed there for her. He rose slowly and walked over to it, peering at it, but not touching it. He bent closer, sniffing cautiously at the rim. When he straightened up, the expression on his face had changed. The professional mask had slipped, replaced by one of profound gravity and alarm. "No," he said, his voice low and firm, resonating through the shocked silence. This was no heart attack. He turned to face us, his eyes meeting each of ours in turn. "I have seen this before, in toxicology studies. The rapidity of the collapse, the cyanosis, the faint odor. I would stake my professional reputation on it." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon us. Miss Croft was poisoned. Poison! The word transformed the atmosphere in an instant. The lingering shock of a tragic death gave way to the cold, creeping horror of a deliberate act. Murder. One of us, in this very room, was a killer. The wind rattling the windows no longer sounded like a simple storm, it sounded like a cage being locked. "Poison," Lady Beatrice whispered, her sobs catching in her throat. But how?" Dr. Arbuthnot pointed a single steady finger towards the piano. "The water," he said. "She took a sip just before she was to sing. It would have had to have been a fast-acting poison, prussic acid, or one of the cyanide salts, perhaps, almost instantaneous in its effect." My mind, trained by years of association with Poirot, began to race. The glass of water. It had been sitting there on the piano. Who had put it there? Who had had access to it? I tried to replay the last hour in my memory. The butler had brought in a tray with a carafe of water and a single glass before we entered the room. It had been placed on a small side table. I remember seeing Miss Croft herself pour the water just as we were all taking our seats. But that meant nothing. The poison could have been in the carafe, or it could have been introduced into the glass at any point before she drank from it. And we had all been in the room. "The telephone," I said suddenly, the practical thought cutting through my shock. "And how do you propose we do that, Captain? The storm took out the lines an hour ago. MacLeod tried to call the village about a fallen tree on the main road just before dinner. The line was quite dead." We were trapped by the storm, miles from the nearest village, with a murderer in our midst and the body of their victim cooling on the floor. "Then no one is to leave this room," Sir Alister commanded, his voice regaining some of his old authority. He was no longer the enraged collector. He was the master of his fortress, a fortress that had been breached from within. Dr. Arbuthnot nodded his agreement. He is right. The glass, the carafe, everything must be left precisely as it is. We stood there, a small, isolated knot of humanity, staring at one another with a new and dreadful suspicion. Every polite smile, every casual word from earlier in the evening now seemed like a potential lie, a mask for a murderous heart. Julian's impatience, Lady Beatrice's anxiety, Eleanor's silence, the doctor's severity, Sir Alister's obsession, all were now cast in a sinister new light. Who hated Genevieve Croft enough to kill her? Or was her death merely a means to another more terrible end? The storm raged on, its fury unabated, a perfect symphony for the fear and mistrust that had taken root inside Blackwood Manor. I looked at the body of the woman whose song would never be heard again, and then at the faces of the living, and a profound sense of inadequacy washed over me. I felt like a schoolboy presented with an impossible problem in trigonometry. "Oh, Poirot, my friend," I thought with a desperation that was almost a prayer. "Where are you now? You, with your magnificent mustaches and your little grey cells, you would know what to do."
Chapter 3. An Unexpected Guest. The hours that followed the discovery of the murder were the longest of my life. A dreadful, waking nightmare unfolded in the grand, cold rooms of Blackwood Manor. By mutual, unspoken consent, no one retired to their bedrooms. The idea of being alone, separated from the group in the shadowed hallways of that vast and silent house, was an unbearable thought. To sleep was to be vulnerable. Dr. Arbuthnot had supervised the grim task of covering Miss Croft's body with a velvet curtain pulled from one of the windows. He then firmly locked the music-room door and pocketed the key, declaring that nothing further was to be done until the police could arrive. With that, the small, terrified group of us retreated to the great hall, the scene of our strained introductions what felt like a lifetime ago. The fire had been built up into a roaring blaze, but we huddled near it for a reason that had little to do with the cold. We sought not warmth, but light against the encroaching darkness, both outside the windows and within our own hearts. The night was a tableau of suspicion. We sat in a rough circle, our faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, each of us studying the others, searching for the slightest crack in a carefully constructed facade. Every sigh, every nervous twitch, every averted gaze was magnified into a potential sign of guilt. Lady Beatrice, her earlier hysteria subsided into a state of shocked exhaustion, sat huddled in a large armchair, her face pale and tear-streaked. Eleanor Vance was beside her, a quiet, calming presence, though her own stillness seemed more watchful than comforting. Julian Finch paced restlessly before the hearth, a glass of brandy in his hand. His charming mask entirely gone, replaced by a raw, naked agitation. He looked like a caged animal. Was it fear or frustration? Sir Alistair remained in his high-backed chair, a grim, immovable patriarch. He had not spoken another word since ordering the room sealed. He simply stared into the flames, his expression one of thwarted rage. His breathing was shallow, and once or twice Dr. Arbuthnot went to his side, murmuring something in a low voice, only to be waved away with an impatient skeletal hand. The doctor himself maintained his professional composure, but his eyes, behind the thick lenses of his spectacles, were constantly moving, observing us all. I found myself cataloguing details, a habit ingrained in me by my association with Poirot. The glass of water on the piano. Miss Croft had poured her herself from the carafe. The butler had placed the tray on a side table before any of us entered the music room. But between that moment and her drinking from it, there was a period of perhaps 15 or 10 minutes as we all found our seats and settled. The room was not brightly lit. Anyone might have approached the piano, unnoticed, on the pretext of admiring the instrument. Anyone could have possessed a small vial, a packet of crystals. Anyone. The storm began to abate in the small hours of the morning, its furious shrieking subsiding into a mournful, sobbing wind. As gray, watery daylight finally seeped through the tall, mullioned windows, it revealed a scene of devastation. The lawns were littered with fallen branches, and the landscape was shrouded in a thick, spectral mist. It was a world washed clean, yet the atmosphere inside the house remained thick with the grime of the previous night's events. MacLeod, the grim-faced chauffeur, entered the hall at 7 o'clock, his expression even more dour than usual. "The road is impassable, sir," he announced, his Scottish burr thick. "There is a great oak down about a mile from the gates, and beyond that the burn has overflowed its banks. It has caused a landslide. No one will be getting in or out of here today." "And the telephone line?" Julian demanded. "Still dead, sir. Looks to have been brought down by the tree." The confirmation of our imprisonment sent a fresh wave of despair through the room. We were utterly alone with our deadly secret. It was shortly after 10 o'clock when we heard it. At first, it was a faint, unfamiliar noise, a low, grinding sound that seemed to come from the direction of the rear of the estate. It grew steadily louder, the unmistakable chug of a motor engine where no engine should be. We all fell silent, listening. "What in God's name is that?" Julian muttered, moving to the window. "It cannot be the police," Dr. Arbuthnot stated. "It is impossible." We watched as a small, battered motor car, a local taxi by the looks of it, bounced and jostled its way up the long, winding service track that was typically used by delivery carts. It navigated the muddy, rutted path with extraordinary care, finally coming to a halt near the kitchens. The driver's door opened, and a stout local man in tweed got out. But it was the figure who emerged from the passenger side that caused me to gasp aloud. He was a man of no more than 5 feet 4 inches, his body egg-shaped, his head tilted slightly to one side. He wore a heavy green-lined overcoat, and a thick muffler was wrapped around his neck. Despite the perilous journey, his black patent leather shoes were, I noted, with an inward smile, still remarkably shiny, though a small speck of mud on the left toe was clearly causing him immense personal distress. He paid the driver, then picked up a small, elegant valise and began to march, with as much dignity as he could muster, towards the main house. His magnificent, upward-curled mustaches were a proud banner proclaiming his identity to the world. "Poirot!" I cried, a wave of such profound relief that I felt momentarily weak at the knees. "It's Hercule Poirot!" I rushed to the great doors and threw them open just as he was ascending the final step. "Hastings, my dear friend!" he exclaimed, his face, which had been a mask of displeasure at the state of the path, lighting up with genuine warmth. "What a happy chance to find you here!" "Chance, Poirot? What on earth are you doing here?" "Ah, that is a question of some complexity. The journey, it was, how you say, formidable. The train, it was draughty. The weather, it is an abomination to civilized man. And the final leg of the journey, do not speak of it. This driver, he knew of a road used only by the goats, and, I suspect, the madmen." He stopped and surveyed the assembled company in the hall, his sharp green eyes taking in every detail of the 10th scene. "It would appear," he said softly, "that I have arrived in a house of sorrow." "Sorrow does not cover it, Poirot," I said, lowering my voice. "There's been a murder." Poirot's eyes widened, but he showed no other sign of surprise. He simply nodded slowly, as if confirming a private hypothesis. "Alors," he murmured, "so I am not too early. I am perhaps too late." At this, Sir Alistair, who had been observing the scene with a strange, calculating expression, spoke for the first time that morning. "You are Hercule Poirot?" he rasped. Poirot turned and gave a small, precise bow. "I am, Sir Alistair?" "You did not expect you until tomorrow," Sir Alistair said. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. This, then, was the explanation. My head swam with it, the delicate matter, the need for a man of steady nerve. It had not been for me at all. Sir Alistair had been summoning the greatest detective in Europe. My presence was merely to be a smokescreen, a familiar, unassuming face to prevent the other guests from taking alarm at the arrival of a stranger. My business in Geneva, it concluded with a rapidity that was most gratifying. I sent a telegram, but I imagine, given the circumstances of this storm, it was not received. I decided to press on. I received your letter, Sir Alistair, and I confess it piqued my interest. He withdrew a familiar cream-colored envelope from his breast pocket. You spoke of a priceless jewel, a treasure of unique quality that you feared was in danger. You wrote, "I have acquired the rarest voice in the world, and I fear someone means to silence it." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the others. "The treasure," Poirot said softly, his voice full of a sudden deep pity, "was not a thing of stone or metal, was it? It was a woman. It was the voice of Genevieve Croft." "And you are too late," Sir Alistair hissed, his eyes burned.
Chapter 4. The Theatre of the Mind. If Hercule Poirot was in any way daunted by the grim task before him, he showed no sign of it. On the contrary, he seemed to be imbued with a fresh, electric energy. While the rest of us were paralyzed by shock and suspicion, Poirot was a whirlwind of quiet, purposeful activity. His first pronouncement was that the great hall, with its chaotic disarray of anxious people, was an entirely unsuitable environment for the serious work that lay ahead. No, this will not do at all," he declared, surveying the room with a look of intense distaste. "The mind, it requires order, precision. The truth cannot be found in a haystack of emotion. We must have a theatre for the mind." His choice of theatre was the library. It was a magnificent two-story room, lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that had likely not been touched in a generation. A large mahogany desk stood before a tall window overlooking the desolate, mist-shrouded grounds. To Poirot, this was a stage, and he immediately set about arranging it to his satisfaction. He directed me, with a series of precise gestures, to move the furniture. A single, high-backed wing chair was placed behind the desk, facing the door. This, clearly, was his throne. A second, smaller, less comfortable chair was positioned directly opposite it, some 6 feet away. This was the chair for the witness, the suspect, the actor who was to play their part. "Voilà," he said with satisfaction when our work was done. "Here there are no distractions. There is only you, me, and the truth, which we shall encourage to come and sit between us." He then dispatched me to summon the residents of the house, one by one, for a private conversation. "We shall begin with the man of science," he instructed, "for it is always best to begin with the facts that can be measured before we proceed to the more volatile element of the human heart." While I was gone, he evidently had a quiet word with the butler, for a small tray bearing a steaming pot of hot chocolate and a single, delicate cup and saucer soon appeared on the corner of the desk. Dr. Arbuthnot entered the library with a stiff, professional air. He seemed to resent the summons, as if Poirot's presence were an affront to his own authority. He sat in the designated chair, his back rigid, his hands resting on his knees. Poirot began, his tone gentle, almost conversational. "Dr. Arbuthnot, I am grateful for your time. In the regrettable absence of the official police, your expertise is invaluable. You mentioned last night the words prussic acid or cyanide. You're quite certain of this?" "As certain as one can be without a full toxicological analysis," the doctor replied, his voice clipped. "The symptoms were classic, the astonishing speed of the collapse, the faint odor of bitter almonds I detected near the glass, the cyanosis. It points overwhelmingly to poisoning by a cyanide compound." "And this poison, how would it be administered?" Poirot asked, pouring himself a cup of hot chocolate with a steady hand. "Most likely as a salt, potassium or sodium cyanide. It dissolves readily in water. It would be colorless, and its taste would be momentarily masked by the water itself before the burning sensation began. A lethal dose is remarkably small, a few 100 milligrams, an amount that could be concealed under a fingernail." Poirot's eyes flickered with interest. "So small. And the effect is, as you said, almost instantaneous." "Within a minute, certainly. Consciousness is lost in seconds. It is a brutally efficient poison." "A doctor's poison, perhaps?" Poirot inquired softly. Arbuthnot's expression hardened. "It is a chemical, Monsieur Poirot, not a medical tool. It is used in metallurgy, in photography, in entomology for killing insects. Its availability is, unfortunately, wider than you might imagine. I have none in my medical bag, if that is your insinuation." "But of course not," Poirot said smoothly. "I merely explore the possibilities. Tell me of the victim, Miss Croft. You had examined her?" "Yes, at Sir Alister's request, when she arrived 2 days ago. She complained of headaches and fatigue. My examination found her to be physically healthy, though suffering from what I would diagnose as severe nervous exhaustion, high anxiety. She was, to be frank, terrified to be here." "Terrified? Of what?" The doctor hesitated. "Of Sir Alister, of his intensity. He had been pursuing her for months, offering a king's ransom for this private performance. She had refused, but Sir Alister can be a very persuasive man. He saw her not as a person, but as an object. His obsession with her voice was profoundly unhealthy." "And you, doctor, what is your relationship with your patient, Sir Alister?" "I am his physician," Arbuthnot stated flatly. "I have managed his cardiac condition for the past 5 years. My relationship with him is entirely professional." "And profitable, one imagines," Poirot murmured into his cup. A dull flush crept up the doctor's neck. "Sir Alister is a generous employer." I am sure. Thank you, Doctor. You have been most illuminating. After the doctor had departed, his composure visibly ruffled, Julian Finch was shown in. He swaggered into the room, attempting a display of casual indifference that was betrayed by the restless energy in his eyes. He slumped into the chair, crossing his legs. "Well, let's get on with it," he said. "Found your man yet, have you?" "Patience, Monsieur Finch. The truth, she is a shy creature. She must be coaxed from her hiding place. You are Sir Alister's nephew, and his sole heir, I believe." "That's the general idea, though the old devil seems intent on living forever." "His death would therefore be a great benefit to you, financially?" Julian gave a short, harsh laugh. "My dear fellow, I make no secret of it. I have debts. The inheritance would be a godsend. But if you think I'd murder some warbling canary to bring it about, you're mad. In fact, her death is a damnable inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Poirot asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of course. Don't you see? The old man was living for this concert. He'd talked of nothing else for months. He poured a fortune into getting her here. This performance was the only thing keeping his blasted heart ticking. Now that she's dead, he'll probably give up the ghost out of sheer disappointment. And while that might seem like good news for me, it also means his death occurs in a house full of suspicion, with a famous detective sitting in his library. It complicates matters enormously. Believe me, I'd have preferred him to last another 6 months and pop off quietly in his sleep." It was, I had to admit, a brutally callous but strangely logical argument. "So you had no ill will towards Miss Croft?" "I had no feelings for her whatsoever. She was a piece of my uncle's collection, like his Fabergé eggs or his Rembrandt, expensive, delicate, and a dead bore." "In the music room, before she sang, where were you?" "Standing near the fireplace, trying to look interested. I never went near the piano, never touched the bloody water. I was watching my uncle watch her. It was quite the performance." "Indeed," Poirot said thoughtfully. "A performance on all sides, it seems." When Julian had gone, leaving a faint scent of brandy and resentment in his wake, I showed in Lady Beatrice. She entered the room like a ghost, her beautiful face a mask of tragedy. She sank into the chair, her hands twisting a small lace handkerchief in her lap. Poirot's demeanor softened instantly. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Madame, I understand this is a terrible ordeal. I will be as brief as I am able." "It's horrible," she whispered, her blue eyes swimming with tears. "To see her die like that, in our home." "You were fond of Miss Croft?" Poirot asked. She shook her head, a flicker of something other than grief in her eyes. "I barely knew her. She was my husband's interest, not mine." The emphasis was subtle, but clear. "Your marriage to Sir Alister, it is a happy one, madame." The question was so direct, so personal, that I saw her flinch. The tears welled up and spilled over, tracing paths down her pale cheeks. "Happy," she choked out. "He is my husband. I am his wife. It is my duty to be what he requires." She stopped, biting her lip, as if she had said too much. "And what he required last night was an audience for Miss Croft. Were you jealous, perhaps, of the attention, the expense he lavished upon her?" "Jealous?" She gave a small, watery laugh that held no humor. "Monsieur Poirot, you do not understand. My husband is a man of obsessions. They are all-consuming. For the last 6 months, his obsession has been the voice of Genevieve Croft. Before that, it was a collection of Ming vases. Before that, a racehorse. I was not jealous of Miss Croft. I was—"
Chapter 5. The Poor Companion. When the library door opened for the 4th time, it was to admit Eleanor Vance. She entered not with the stiff resentment of the doctor or the arrogant slump of the nephew, but with an apologetic diffidence, as if she were intruding upon matters far too important for the likes of her. She was dressed in a simple grey wool dress, the colour of the ever-present mist outside, and she seemed to absorb the light of the room rather than reflect it. She sat on the very edge of the witness chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes cast downwards. She was the very picture of a woman who had made a career of being invisible. Poirot regarded her for a long moment, not with the sharp, probing intensity he had shown the others, but with a quiet, almost gentle curiosity. "Mademoiselle Vance," he began, his voice soft, "there is no need for alarm. I wish only for your help." "I will help if I can, monsieur," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "But I am afraid I have little to offer. In a house such as this, it is my position to see and hear nothing. An admirable quality in a companion, I am sure. But murder, it has a way of making itself seen and heard by everyone. You are, I think, more than a companion to Lady Beatrice. You are her friend, are you not?" For the first time, Eleanor Vance looked up, and in her pale, unassuming eyes I saw a flicker of steel. "Her ladyship has very few friends in this place," she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. "If I can provide her with some small comfort, I am glad to do so." "And you believe she is in need of comfort?" "She is a sensitive creature in a cold house, married to a very difficult man," Miss Vance stated, her voice gaining strength. "Sir Alistair, he does not cherish delicate things, Monsieur Poirot. He collects them. He puts them on display, and when they no longer please him, he grows bored or angry." The implication hung in the air, as clear and chilling as the winter mist. She was not just talking about the singer or the Ming vases. "Tell me of Miss Croft," Poirot urged. "Did Lady Beatrice confide in you? Was she, as I asked her, jealous?" "Jealous?" Miss Vance gave a small, sad smile. "No, that is not the right word. She was afraid. We both were. Sir Alistair's obsessions are like fevers. They consume him, and they consume all the air in the house. When he brought Miss Croft here, it was as if he had captured a wild bird. He demanded it sing for him, and he did not care that the bars of the cage were killing it. Lady Beatrice did not feel jealousy. She felt pity, a kinship, perhaps." "And you, mademoiselle? What did you feel?" "I felt the same," she said simply. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "In the music room, before the tragedy, you were with Lady Beatrice?" "Yes, I was helping her with her shawl. It had caught on her chair. And from your vantage point, did you see anything? Anything at all? Near the piano or the small table with the water?" Eleanor Vance looked down at her hands again, her fingers beginning to work at one another. She was silent for so long that I thought she would not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was a strained whisper. "I should have said something sooner, but I was frightened. I did not wish to make things worse, to cast suspicion where... But a woman is dead. I cannot stay silent." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "It was Dr. Arbuthnot." I felt a jolt, as if a circuit had been completed. Of course, the doctor! "You are certain of this?" Poirot asked, his voice betraying no emotion. "I am. Just before we all took our seats, I saw him go over to the piano. Sir Alistair had called to him, asked some question about the room's temperature. The doctor answered him, and then he lingered for a moment by the piano. He adjusted a sheet of music that was sitting there. His black medical bag, the one he always carries, was on a chair not 3 feet away. His back was to most of us. He was only there for a few seconds, but it would have been enough, would it not, for a man who knows what he is doing? Her words tumbled out, a torrent of accusation held back too long. "Did you see him put anything in the glass?" "No," she admitted, shaking her head. "I did not see the specific action, but he was there. His hands were busy at the piano, and he had the opportunity, and the means are in his bag, are they not? Potions and powders for every ailment." She looked up at Poirot, her eyes pleading. "He is a cold man, Monsieur Poirot. He controls Sir Alister's life with his medicines. Perhaps he thought Miss Croft's presence, the excitement, perhaps it was a danger to his patient and to his own position here." When she had gone, I could barely contain my excitement. "Poirot, that's it!" I exclaimed. "He saw him. It fits with what Lady Beatrice said, a man's dark cuff. Arbuthnot wears nothing but dark suits. He had the poison in his bag, a perfect opportunity, and a motive, just as Miss Vance said, to protect his lucrative position as Sir Alister's keeper. It's a wonderfully simple." Poirot did not share my enthusiasm. He stared at the door through which Eleanor Vance had departed, a thoughtful, almost melancholy expression on his face. "Is it simple, Hastings," he murmured, "or is it merely convenient? The quiet little mouse, she has found her voice, and with it she points a trembling finger and cries, 'There is the cat.' One must ask oneself, why?" Before I could argue, he announced it was time for the final interview. Let us hear from the spider at the center of the web, the great collector himself. Sir Alister did not walk into the library. He made an entrance. Leaning heavily on a silver-headed cane, with Dr. Arbuthnot hovering anxiously at his elbow, he moved to the chair and lowered himself into it with a grimace of pain. He dismissed the doctor with a flick of his wrist. He was a man accustomed to absolute command, and even in his infirmity, his presence was immense. "Well, Poirot," he began, his voice a dry rustle of paper, "you were hired to prevent a theft, and you have failed. The jewel has been stolen under my nose. What do you have to say for yourself?" "That the crime has changed, Sir Alister," Poirot replied calmly, "from theft to murder. You told me in your letter that you feared someone meant to silence Miss Croft. Who did you suspect?" Sir Alister waved a dismissive hand. "No one specific, everyone. The world is full of mediocrity. It despises genius. It seeks to pull it down, to shatter it. I suspected the world." "A very large suspect pool," Poirot noted dryly. "Let us narrow it. Why was Miss Croft so terrified to be here?" For the first time, a flicker of something, was it guilt, crossed the old man's face. The woman was a bundle of nerves, an artistic temperament. She had decided foolishly that her voice was gone. I knew better. I knew her voice was a Stradivarius that simply needed to be played. I made her an offer she could not refuse. "You coerced her?" "I convinced her," Sir Alister corrected, his eyes glinting. "I explained that the contract she had signed with my recording company were ironclad, that I could, if I chose, ruin her utterly. I offered her a choice: sing for me one last time, in private, and receive a pension that would allow her to live in luxury forever, or defy me, and be hounded by lawyers until she had nothing left. She made the sensible choice. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it left me speechless. He had bought her, body and soul. So you surrounded this terrified woman with your unhappy family, Poirot continued, his voice dangerously soft. A wife who fears you, a nephew who wishes you dead. And you expected her to what? Create beauty for you. They are gnats, Sir Alister hissed, his face contorting with contempt. Beatrice, Julian, their petty concerns are meaningless. This was about art.
Chapter 6. The Discarded Jewel. Dr. Arbuthnot unlocked the music room door with a reluctant, grating turn of the key. As he pushed it open, the air that spilled out was cold and unnaturally still. The room, which only the previous night had been the stage for such high drama and terror, now felt like a desecrated chapel. The heavy velvet curtains were still drawn, plunging the space into a gloomy twilight. The body of Genevieve Croft was, to my profound relief, no longer present. The doctor explained in a low tone that he and the butler had moved her to the cold larder early that morning, deeming it the most suitable and respectful place under the circumstances. But her presence lingered. An expensive funereal perfume, tuberose, I thought, hung in the air, mingled with the faintest, almost imperceptible chemical tang that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The room was a tableau frozen in time, the scattered sheets of Schubert on the piano, the chairs arranged for an audience that had witnessed a death instead of a recital, the fateful glass of water still sitting on the polished ebony lid of the grand piano. Poirot stood on the threshold for a full minute, his head tilted, his eyes scanning every inch of the room. He was not merely looking, he was absorbing the scene, committing its every detail to the flawless archive of his mind. "The stage," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Everything that is important happened upon the stage. We must persuade it to tell us its secrets." With that, he stepped inside, his movements precise and deliberate, as if he were walking on holy ground. He ignored, for the moment, the piano and the glass of water, the twin focal points of the tragedy that held my own gaze captive. Instead, his method, as always, began with a structured, almost geometric logic. He started at the door and began to move slowly clockwise around the perimeter of the room. His attention to detail was a thing of wonder. He examined the pile of the Persian rug, the velvet nap of the chairs, the cold ashes in the grate of the fireplace where Julian had claimed to be standing. He peered at the heavy brocade curtains, running a gloved finger along their hems. He was, I knew, looking for anything that was out of place, any tiny discordant note in the symphony of the room. When he finally arrived at the small side table that had held the water carafe, he stopped. He studied the silver tray, the elegant decanter, and the single tumbler that remained upon it. He noted aloud, "The carafe, it is still almost full. Mademoiselle Croft, she poured only one glass for herself. An independent woman, you see, Hastings." He then proceeded to the doctor's black bag, which still sat on a chair where Eleanor Vance had described seeing it. "Monsieur le Docteur," he said, turning to Arbuthnot, who stood grimly by the door, "you would permit me?" With a curt nod from the doctor, Poirot opened the bag. He did not rummage through it. Rather, he observed its contents with an eye of professional respect, noting the neatly arranged rows of vials, the sterile instruments, and the rolls of bandages. "All is in perfect order.
the tools of healing, and yet a substance from a place much like this was used to killing. He closed the bag with a soft click and moved on. At last he reached the epicenter of the crime, the grand piano. He circled it once, his eyes not on the keys or the sheet music, but on the floor surrounding it. He examined the area where Miss Croft had fallen, a slight indentation in the thick rug marking the spot. "So," he said quietly, "she stands here, she sips the water. The poison, it is swift, brutal. She gasps, she clutches her throat, she stumbles, perhaps one step, perhaps two, and then she falls." He paced out the sequence, his small patent leather shoes moving softly on the carpet. "Her body would have been found approximately here." I was growing impatient. All of this we knew. My mind was still fixed on Eleanor Vance's testimony, on the image of the cold-hearted doctor dropping a pinch of white powder into that glass. But Poirot was not looking where the body had fallen. His eyes, like a hawk's, were scanning the floor several feet away, near the ornate carved leg of the piano stool. He stopped. He leaned forward, his back straight, his gaze fixed on a particular spot in the intricate pattern of the rug. "Ah," he breathed, a soft exhalation of pure satisfaction. "What have we here?" He pointed with the tip of his elegant cane. I peered at the spot, seeing nothing at first but the deep red and blue wool of the carpet. Then I saw it, a tiny glint of gold, almost entirely lost in the pile. It was no bigger than my thumbnail. Poirot produced a large, clean handkerchief from his pocket. He knelt, an action he undertook only in the most serious of circumstances, and with the delicacy of a surgeon, he plucked the object from the rug. He rose to his feet and held it out for us to see, nestled in the white linen. It was a brooch. It was a small, finely wrought but clearly inexpensive thing made of gilded metal, fashioned in the shape of a small bird in mid-song, a nightingale, perhaps. At its heart was a single, tiny, lackluster sapphire for an eye. "A jewel," I murmured. "It must have fallen from Miss Croft's dress when she collapsed." "You think so, Hastings?" Poirot asked me, his eyes sharp. "Let us consider. You saw the lady last night. You have an eye for the attire of the beautiful woman. Did you observe her wearing such a pin?" I cast my mind back. I could picture her gown, a shimmering creation of dark blue silk. I remembered the magnificent rope of pearls at her throat, the diamond clips in her hair. This small, almost tawdry little bird seemed entirely out of place with the rest of her finery. "No," I admitted. "No, I don't believe I did." Poirot turned to the others. "Dr. Arbuthnot, you examined her. Did you see this brooch?" The doctor shook his head. "I did not." "Then let us apply the logic," Poirot continued, his voice taking on the familiar, lecturing tone of a professor revealing a great secret. "Assume for a moment that it did belong to Mademoiselle Croft. She collapses here." He pointed with his cane to the spot where she had fallen. "But the jewel, it is found all the way over here, a good 7 feet away. Does a small pin fly across the room as a woman falls, Hastings? No. It would be found on her person, or within inches of where she landed." My mind was reeling, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle I had so confidently assembled. "But Poirot, who, and what does it mean?" "Ah, Hastings," he said with a look of profound pity on his face, "you are still so convinced of the guilt of the doctor. You are watching the cat, just as the clever little mouse has told you to. But this," he held up the handkerchief, the tiny golden bird lying upon it like a fallen creature, "this is the footprint of the mouse herself, and she has left it in a place she has told us she never was." He folded the handkerchief carefully, concealing the brooch. "The performance in this room, my friend, was not only Mademoiselle Croft's. There was another, much quieter performance happening in the shadows, and its star, I think, has just made her first mistake."
Chapter 7. The Thread of a Lie. Poirot did not confront Eleanor Vance immediately. To have done so in the cold, incriminating atmosphere of the music room would have been, as he later explained to me, to frighten the mouse back into its hole before it has shown us the way to its nest. Instead, he had Dr. Arbuthnot lock the room once more, the tiny golden brooch now safely stowed in his own waistcoat pocket. He then declared that the morning's exertions had been most fatiguing and that he required a period of quiet reflection. In truth, this was a strategic retreat. He had me summon the butler, and through a series of exquisitely polite but relentlessly firm questions, he established the provenance of every member of the household staff. He was particularly interested in anyone who had been hired in the last year, anyone who might have a life or a history unknown to the others. The results were, on the surface, uninteresting. The staff were all long-serving locals, with the exception of the nervous young accompanist who had been hired from an agency in Edinburgh for the single evening and had been sent back in the taxi that had brought Poirot. Our next port of call was the late Miss Croft's bedroom. It was a grand, impersonal guest suite, and her belongings seemed sadly few, almost temporary, as if she had never intended to stay. A single large trunk stood at the foot of the bed. Poirot surveyed the room, his eyes missing nothing, before approaching it. It was, of course, locked. "A locked trunk, Hastings," Poirot mused, tapping his chin. "It is a statement, is it not? It says, 'Here are my secrets. You are not permitted to see them.'" But a simple lock was no match for Poirot's ingenuity. He produced a small leather case from his valise and, with the aid of a curiously shaped piece of wire, set to work. Within a minute there was a satisfying click. He lifted the heavy lid. The contents were a poignant jumble of a life abruptly ended. There were stage costumes, shimmering with sequins and silk, now lying folded and inert. There were scores of music, letters from admirers, and newspaper clippings celebrating her triumphs. But Poirot pushed past these relics of her public life, searching for something more personal. At the very bottom, beneath a layer of silk stockings, he found a small, leather-bound diary. He opened it with reverence. Much of it was filled with mundane appointments and professional notes, but as he turned to the entries for the last few months, his expression grew intent. He began to read passages aloud in a low murmur. "October 12th, he will not leave me be. Another letter today, not with flowers, but with threats veiled as offers. He speaks of my voice as if he owns it. Does he not understand it is the one part of me I cannot bear to sell? October 19th. The contracts are a prison. How could I have been so foolish all those years ago? I am bound to him. He will ruin me if I refuse. I see no way out. He has summoned me to that dreadful house in Scotland. The name itself, Blackwood, feels like a premonition. October 22nd. A letter today that was not from him. A message of hope, or another snare. She says she is a friend. She says she understands. She says she can help me. She asks me to trust her, to meet me in the gardens upon my arrival. She signed herself only E. Can I dare to hope? E. Hastings, Poirot exclaimed, looking up at me, his eyes bright with discovery. He closed the diary and placed it carefully in his jacket pocket. Our quiet little mouse was not merely an observer, she was a participant. She was in communication with the victim before the murder ever took place. And this, my friend, changes everything.
With this new weapon in his arsenal, he was ready. He asked me to find Miss Vance and request her presence not in the formal library, but in a small, intimate morning room at the back of the house, a room with pale floral wallpaper and a view of the sodden, weeping gardens. It was a far less intimidating space, chosen, I suspect, to lull her into a false sense of security. She entered as she always did, with quiet deference. Poirot was standing by the window, and he did not turn at first. "Mademoiselle Vance," he said, his voice gentle, "I have been admiring the gardens. It is a sad, wild place, is it not? A place where one could have a secret conversation and be sure that no one was watching." I saw her hands clench at her sides. "I do not take your meaning, monsieur." Poirot turned from the window. "Do you not? In her diary, Mademoiselle Croft wrote of receiving a letter from a friend who signed herself E, who offered to help her, a friend she was to meet in secret. That friend was you, was it not?" The color drained from Eleanor Vance's face, leaving it a sickly, pasty white. She sank into a nearby chair as if her legs could no longer support her. "I only wanted to help her." "To help her do what?" Poirot pressed, taking a step closer. "To escape Sir Alistair, or something else?" "He was destroying her," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden fierce passion that was startling to behold. "I saw in her the same terror I see in Lady Beatrice every day. I had to do something." "So you concocted a plan that required you to be near the piano in the music room, a place you swore to me you never were." "I was with Lady Beatrice," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Were you?" Poirot asked softly, and with a theatrical flourish he opened his hand. The little golden nightingale brooch lay gleaming on his palm. The sight of the brooch broke her. A choked sob escaped her lips, and she covered her face with her hands. The quiet, mousy facade crumbled, and in its place was a woman consumed by fear and desperation. "Yes," she wept, "it's mine. It was my mother's. I didn't know I had lost it." "You lost it because you were agitated," Poirot stated, his voice now hard as steel. "You were agitated because you were putting your plan into motion. The plan you and Genevieve Croft arranged. It was not a plan of escape, was it? No, that would be too simple." He loomed over her, his presence filling the small room. "You thought you were setting the stage for a harmless lie, but you set it instead for murder. And the person who substituted the poison, monsieur, is still watching us, even now."
Chapter 8. The Shattered Alibi. Eleanor Vance's confession did not end in a neat, tidy summary. It dissolved into a torrent of hysterical, self-recriminating sobs. She was a woman utterly broken by the catastrophic failure of her own design. I had seen her only as a creature of the shadows, a quiet, unassuming gray moth. But now, illuminated by the harsh glare of the truth, I saw the fierce, desperate loyalty that had driven her to such a reckless act. She had sought to free two birds with one stone, and had instead brought the executioner's axe down upon them both. Poirot, his voice losing its steely edge and reverting to one of gentle, paternal firmness, attempted to calm her. "Mademoiselle, you must compose yourself. What is done is done. What matters now is what happened between your action and Mademoiselle Croft's. The plan was yours and hers alone. You are certain you confided in no one else." "No one," she wept, her voice muffled by her hands. "It was our secret, our only hope. To tell another soul would have been to risk everything." Poirot regarded her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "A secret between two people is a fragile thing, mademoiselle, especially in a house where the walls have ears. I shall return." He turned to me,
his eyes now hard and purposeful. "Come, Hastings. A lie has been exposed. We must now take this small, sharp stone of truth and throw it into the stagnant pond of the household. We shall see what delightfully ugly things rise to the surface from the ripples." He did not choose the intimate morning room for his stage this time, nor the formal library. He gathered them all in the great hall, the vast baronial heart of the house, where the terror had first taken root. He had them assembled before the great fireplace, a small, unhappy flock, and he stood before them like a priest about to deliver a damning sermon. Sir Alister was seated, a thunderous scowl on his face. Julian Finch stood nearby, affecting a casual pose by leaning against the mantelpiece, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the stone. Dr. Arbuthnot was a pillar of professional gravity, while Lady Beatrice seemed to shrink into herself, her gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot began, his voice clear and carrying in the high-ceilinged room. "Mesdames, messieurs, I have summoned you here because there has been a significant development. Our understanding of the tragic events of 2 nights ago was, it appears, fundamentally flawed." He let the statement hang in the air, drawing their undivided attention. "We have been proceeding under the assumption that Mademoiselle Croft was a willing, indeed active participant in the events that led to her death." A collective gasp went around the room. Sir Alister had snapped up, his eyes blazing with incandescent fury. "What is this nonsense?" he snarled. "She was murdered." "Indeed," Poirot agreed smoothly, "but the stage for that murder was set for a very different performance. A harmless piece of theatre was planned, a simple trick designed to deceive, but a second director, a person of true malevolence, rewrote the final act into a tragedy." He paused, and then his gaze moved deliberately to rest upon the doctor. "And so you see, Monsieur le Docteur, the accusation that was leveled against you was itself a piece of the original performance, a piece of misdirection designed to protect the true nature of the plan should it go awry." The relief that washed over Dr. Arbuthnot's face was plain to see. The cloud of suspicion that had been suffocating him was lifted, but in its place a new, more confusing fog descended upon the others. Julian pushed himself off the mantelpiece. "A trick? What kind of trick? What the devil are you talking about?" But it was Sir Alister who held the room's attention. His face had gone a dark, mottled red. The thought that Genevieve Croft had been murdered was an insult to his sense of ownership, but the idea that she had conspired to trick him, to make a fool of him, was an infinitely deeper wound to his monumental pride. "Deceive me," he whispered, the words dripping with venom. "She dared to try and deceive me?" It was at this moment that the emotional fabric of the household finally, irrevocably, tore apart. Lady Beatrice, who had been standing as still as a statue, suddenly let out a strangled cry. It was a sound of pure agony. "No!" she cried, her voice cracking. "It wasn't meant to be like that! Eleanor, you fool, you desperate, foolish girl!" All eyes swiveled to her. She seemed oblivious, her horrified gaze fixed on some internal vision. Eleanor Vance, who had crept into the hall behind me, stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of horrified betrayal. Poirot moved to Lady Beatrice's side. His voice was exquisitely soft. "What was not meant to be, madame?" he asked. Her composure shattered. The years of fear, of repression, of quiet desperation came pouring out in a flood of ragged, hysterical sobs. I told you the story I told you," she wept, turning to Poirot, her eyes wild with terror and guilt. "It was a lie, all of it, a lie to protect her." "To protect Eleanor?" "Yes, she is my only friend. She told me what she was planning to do, the stupid, hopeless plan with the herbs to make Genevieve lose her voice. I begged her not to do it. I told her the risk. I told her what my husband would do if he found out. But she is so stubborn, so loyal. She saw a way to hurt him, to get back at him for all the years of...
Everything!" She was gasping for breath, the words tumbling over one another. Dr. Arbuthnot made a move towards her, but Poirot held up a restraining hand. "And the man's cuff you saw by the water carafe?" he asked, his voice relentlessly gentle. "I saw nothing," she cried, shaking her head violently. "I invented it. When the poor woman died, I was so terrified. I knew what Eleanor had done. I thought she had made a mistake, that her silly potion had been poisonous after all. So I lied. I said she was with me by the fireplace, and I made up the story about the man's cuff to send you looking at Julian, or the doctor, to send you looking at anyone but her. I had to protect her. Don't you see? I had to." The implications were staggering. The only piece of eyewitness testimony we had, the single thread that pointed towards a male culprit, had just been proven to be a complete fabrication. Eleanor's presence at the piano was now confirmed not only by the brooch, but by the confession of her co-conspirator. The two women, the prisoner and her companion, had been in it together. But in trying to save her friend from a charge of manslaughter, Lady Beatrice had inadvertently opened the doors to a far more terrifying possibility. If she had known of the plan, who else had she told? In a moment of weakness or fear? Whom had she confided in, seeking comfort or advice in this house of secrets? Sir Alister stared at his weeping wife, and the look in his eyes was not of pity, but of pure, unadulterated hatred. His prize had been stolen by a murderer, but his pride had been wounded by his own wife. Julian watched them all, his handsome face a mask of cold, shrewd calculation. Poirot stood at the center of the storm, his expression graver than I had ever seen it. He turned to me, and his voice was so low that only I could hear it over the sound of the weeping. "The lies, my friend, are like the skins of an onion. We have peeled away another layer, and what have we found?" He looked at the distraught figure of Lady Beatrice. "More tears, and the truth, I fear, is still weeping at the very center."
Chapter 9. The Gathering of the Threads. The storm of Lady Beatrice's confession passed, leaving in its wake a heavy, oppressive calm. The great hall, which had been the theatre for so much raw emotion, fell silent. Lady Beatrice, utterly spent, had been helped to her room by a grim-faced Dr. Arbuthnot, who administered a sedative. Eleanor Vance had vanished back into the shadows from which she had emerged, her face a pale, haunted mask of guilt. Sir Alister sat immobile in his great chair, radiating a cold, silent fury that was more terrifying than any outburst. Julian Finch, alone, seemed almost energized by the chaos, pouring himself another brandy and watching the wreckage of his family with the cool, appraising eye of a salvage merchant. The truth, it seemed, had not set anyone free. It had merely changed the locks on their cages. Poirot, observing this tableau of dysfunction, gave a small, weary sigh. "The human heart, Hastings," he murmured to me, "it is a labyrinth of vanity and fear. We have chased the truth into its very center, and now we are all lost in the maze." He declared his intention to retire to the library to arrange the facts in a neat and orderly fashion. This was his process, the ritualistic tidying of the mind that always preceded the final brilliant spark of revelation. I followed him into the book-lined sanctum, where he eschewed his previous theatrical arrangement of the furniture and instead began to pace back and forth before the cold fireplace. "Let us review, my friend," he began, tapping his fingertips together. "We began with a simple question. Who killed Genevieve Croft? We now know that this is the wrong question. The question is far more complex. It is this: who knew of the harmless plot and was cruel and clever enough to substitute the harmless for the deadly? Eleanor and Lady Beatrice knew, I offered. Eleanor confessed, and Lady Beatrice admitted her knowledge. We, Poirot agreed, the conspirators. But look at them, Hastings. Mademoiselle Vance, a woman driven by a fierce but misguided loyalty, now shattered by the consequences. Lady Beatrice, a creature of pure fear, who lied not out of malice, but out of a desperate attempt to protect her only friend. Do you see a cold-blooded poisoner in either of them? I do not. Their crime was foolishness, not murder. So we must look elsewhere. He ticked the names off on his fingers. Sir Alister. His pride is monumental. We know he discovered his wife's complicity in the deceit. What if he discovered the entire plot beforehand? Would he commit murder simply to punish the woman who dared to trick him? To destroy the thing he coveted rather than let it escape? It is psychologically possible. He is a tyrant, a collector who would rather smash his prize than see it stolen. Then there is the nephew, Julian Finch. He told us himself that his uncle's death would be a silver lining. He also told us, very logically, that Miss Croft's presence was keeping the old man alive. But what if he overheard the two women plotting? What if he saw a golden opportunity? He could allow the trick to proceed, but with his own fatal addition. The singer dies. The shock, as he predicted, pushes his uncle closer to the grave, and he himself is nowhere near the glass. He has the motive of greed and a cold-blooded nerve. And the doctor, I asked, reluctant to let my initial suspect go entirely. Ah, Dr. Arbuthnot, Poirot mused. He is a man of science and control. He was publicly exonerated, yes, but he saw Miss Croft's presence as a medical risk to his patient. What if he too deduced their amateur's plot? Perhaps he saw a swift, clinical, and permanent way to remove the source of the unhealthy excitement. He had the knowledge of poisons, and his motive would be, in his own mind, a professional one, to protect his patient and his position. He stopped pacing and turned to me, his green eyes luminous with intensity. You see the problem, Hastings. The lies of the two women have created a perfect screen of smoke. Behind it, any one of our three men could have acted. Their motives are all plausible. Their opportunities are, now, equal. Logic alone will not suffice. The murderer is hiding, confident that we can never prove who made the fatal substitution. So what do we do, I asked, feeling the familiar sense of being hopelessly adrift. When an animal will not come out of its burrow, Poirot said, a cunning glint in his eye, one must send in a ferret. We cannot wait for the police and their methodical searches. The storm has passed, and MacLeod informs me the road may be clear by morning. The killer may yet escape. We must force the truth into the light tonight. His energy was suddenly formidable. He had a plan. An hour later, he once again summoned the five of them to the scene of the crime. The music room was now infused with an air of profound dread. They entered reluctantly, their faces pale in the dim light. Poirot stood beside the piano. In his hand, he held the small leather-bound diary of Genevieve Croft. "I have asked you here once last time," he announced, his voice echoing in the stillness, "because this little book has told me its final secrets." This, I knew, was the opening salvo of his attack. Mademoiselle Croft, it seems, was not only an artist, but a meticulous record-keeper. She wrote down everything concerning the sad little plan she concocted with Mademoiselle Vance. She described its appearance and its container, but more than that, fearing that Sir Alister might discover her deception and fearing his terrible wrath, she wrote down the name of the one person in this house whom she suspected was clever enough and ruthless enough to turn her plan against her. It was a masterful bluff, a lie of breathtaking audacity. He had their complete, terrified attention. "The police will be here in the morning," he continued, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "They will, of course, wish to search all your rooms. They are professionals. They will find whatever is to be found. A small forgotten bottle, perhaps, a box of powder, the container that used to hold the cyanide, now hastily washed, but still bearing a trace. It is an inevitability. He then did something remarkable. He walked over to a heavy oak tantalus on a side table, a box containing decanters of spirits. It was locked. He produced a key, opened it, and placed the diary inside. He locked the box and left the key, a small ornate brass thing, plainly sitting on the table beside it. "The evidence is secure," he announced. "I am now very tired. The little grey cells, they require their rest before the final arrangement of the puzzle. We will speak no more of this until the morning." He turned and walked towards the door, a picture of dismissal. He had loaded the gun, cocked the hammer, and now he was simply walking away, leaving them alone with their fear and the ticking clock of the coming dawn. "Come, Hastings," he said to me, "a cup of hot chocolate is in order." But we did not go to the library for chocolate. Instead, Poirot led me to a small, dark alcove on the first-floor landing. It was a recess for a suit of armor, and it afforded us a perfect, shadowed view of the great hall and the main staircase leading to the bedrooms. "And now, my friend, we wait," he whispered, his voice a faint breath in the darkness. "We have told the killer two things. First, that there is written proof of their guilt, and second, that there is physical proof of their crime hidden in their room. They cannot risk leaving it there for the police to find. They have no choice. They must retrieve it and dispose of it tonight. Now." We stood in the cold, absolute silence of the house. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The great clock in the hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing like a death knell. I held my breath, my ears straining for the slightest sound. Then we heard it. From the floor above, the faint, unmistakable creak of a floorboard. A pause. Then the incredibly soft sound of a bedroom door being opened. Poirot's hand gripped my arm, his fingers like steel. The trap had been sprung. The ferret was on the move.
Chapter 10. The Final Performance. We did not have long to wait. The silence in the great house was so profound that the soft scrape of the bedroom door opening above us sounded like a thunderclap. My heart hammered against my ribs. I peered through the gap between the suit of armor and the wall, my eyes fixed on the top of the grand staircase. A figure emerged from the shadows of the upper landing. It was a man, moving with a quiet, practiced stealth that spoke of a cool and steady nerve. He did not look towards the library, nor did he seem concerned with the locked tantalus downstairs. His objective lay elsewhere. He carried a small object in his hand, though it was impossible to see what it was in the gloom. He moved swiftly and silently down the main staircase, his path taking him not towards the front of the house, but towards the rear, towards the servants' quarters and the kitchens. He was going to the boiler room, the one place in the house where a small object could be utterly and irrevocably destroyed by fire. As the figure passed the bottom of the stairs and crossed a patch of moonlight slanting from a high window, I saw his face. My breath caught in my throat. It was not the swaggering Julian Finch, nor the wraith-like Sir Alister. It was the calm, controlled, and rational man of science, Dr. Arbuthnot. Poirot's grip on my arm tightened, a silent command. We slipped from our hiding place, our feet making no sound on the thick runners of the hallway. We followed him through the baize door that separated the family's domain from that of the staff, down a cold, stone-flagged corridor.
A faint, dry heat and the smell of coal dust told us we were close. He pushed open a heavy iron door, and the red glow of the boiler's furnace painted his grim, determined face in demonic hues. He opened the small furnace door, the rush of heat making the air shimmer. He was holding a small dark blue glass bottle, no bigger than his thumb. He drew back his arm to throw it into the flames. "I would not do that if I were you, Monsieur le Docteur," a voice said, calm and clear, from the doorway behind him. Dr. Arbuthnot froze, his arms still raised. He spun around, his professional composure utterly shattered, replaced by the cornered, feral look of a trapped animal. His eyes were wide with disbelief and fury. Poirot stood there, a small, implacable figure, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the corridor. I stood just behind him. "The performance," Poirot said softly, "is over." 15 minutes later, we were all assembled for the last time. It was a grim, exhausted gathering in the library, the room where the investigation had begun. Dr. Arbuthnot sat in the witness chair, his face a stony mask, the small blue bottle now standing on the desk like a piece of damning evidence in a courtroom. The others, Sir Alister, Julian, Lady Beatrice, and a trembling Eleanor Vance, watched, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. Poirot stood before them, in his element. This was his true theatre. "A crime has been committed," he began, his voice filling the silent room. "A woman is dead. We have been faced with a puzzle of great complexity, a puzzle made all the more difficult by a web of secrets and lies. But now the lies have been swept away, and the truth, as it always does, reveals itself to be, at its heart, quite simple." He looked at Lady Beatrice and Eleanor Vance. "It was not you," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Your plot was born of desperation and foolishness, not malice. You sought to stage a comedy of deception, and you had the great misfortune for a true villain to be waiting in the wings to turn it into a tragedy. You are guilty of much, but not of murder." He then turned to Julian Finch. "Nor was it you, Monsieur le Finch. Your motive was greed, yes, but your logic, as you explained it to me, was impeccable. You needed your uncle to die, but quietly, without the complication of a murder investigation. The death of Miss Croft was, as you said, an inconvenience. You are a callous man, Monsieur le Finch, but you are not a stupid one. This murder was too risky, too unpredictable for you." His gaze finally settled on the master of the house. "And you, Sir Alister, your rage, your wounded pride, when you learned of the deception, was magnificent to behold. It was the rage of a king betrayed. And one might think that you, having discovered the plot, would have killed Miss Croft out of pure spite. But that is not your nature. You are a collector, a possessor. You would not smash your most priceless treasure. You would merely lock it in a cage for the rest of its life. The murder robbed you of that pleasure. No, you did not kill her." He paused, walking slowly towards the desk, towards the silent figure of the doctor. "Which leaves us," he said quietly, "with the man we first suspected and then so conveniently dismissed. The calm, rational man of science who took control of the chaos, who pronounced the cause of death, who locked the crime scene. The director who pretended to be a mere member of the audience." Dr. Arbuthnot stared back, his expression unreadable. "This is absurd. You have no proof." "Proof? Poirot's eyes flashed. "I have this." He gestured to the blue bottle. "The bottle that contained the potassium cyanide you are so desperate to destroy. But the physical proof, it is merely the punctuation at the end of the sentence. The sentence itself is the logic, the psychology, and your story, Doctor, is the only one that makes perfect sense." "And what is my supposed motive?" Arbuthnot sneered. "Not the one we thought. Not to protect Sir Alister's fragile health. That was your duty, but it was not your passion. Your passion was control. Sir Alister was your patient, yes, but he was also your life's work, your greatest asset. You controlled his life with a delicate balance of medications, keeping him alive, keeping him dependent. You controlled the man who controlled a vast fortune. And as long as you controlled him, your position was secure, your future guaranteed." He leant forward, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. "But Genevieve Croft threatened that control. Sir Alister's obsession with her was absolute. It was unhealthy. It was unpredictable. And you, Doctor, you discovered something that no one else knew, did you not? Perhaps you overheard a conversation or saw a document on his desk. You learned that Sir Alister, in his obsessive madness, was in the process of changing his will. He was planning to leave a vast portion of his fortune to a foundation in Miss Croft's name to preserve the legacy of her voice. An immense fortune diverted, a fortune that would no longer be under your subtle influence." "Lies," Arbuthnot snapped. "Is it?" Poirot countered. "Miss Croft had to be removed, not because she was a threat to her host's health, but because she was a threat to his doctor's wealth. You did not know of the specific plot the women had planned. You did not need to. You are an observant man. You saw their nervous whispers, their secret meetings, and on the night of the performance, you saw your chance. Eleanor Vance told us she saw you by the piano. She believed you were taking something from your medical bag. A foolish assumption. You are too clever for that, Doctor. The cyanide was not in your bag. It was on your person, in this very bottle. You told us cyanide is used in entomology, for killing insects. I took the liberty this evening of inquiring with your rooms. The staff confirmed you have a celebrated collection of moths. The poison was your own for your hobby, a hobby that furnished you with the perfect, untraceable murder weapon. When you approached the piano, your back was to the room. You performed a simple, swift action. You saw the glass of water had been tampered with. Perhaps it was cloudy from the herbal potion. In a single movement, you emptied the glass into the soil of the potted fern beside the piano, a detail no one would notice, and refilled it from the carafe, adding your own fatal ingredient. It took less than 5 seconds. Then you announced the death was poison. You identified this specific type. You took
Chapter 11. An Order of the Mind. The morning broke, clear and cold. The storm had passed as if it had never been, and a pale, watery sunlight washed over the Scottish Highlands, making the rain-soaked landscape glitter. The sky was a fragile, brilliant blue. It seemed a cruel mockery, this display of natural purity, after the night of sordid human revelation. The arrival of the local constabulary was a quiet, almost anticlimactic affair. They were 2 stout, serious men, led by an inspector whose grim face showed that the name of Sir Alister Finch was not one to be taken lightly, even in the case of murder. There was no struggle. Dr. Arbuthnot, dressed in the same severe suit as always, submitted to his arrest with a chilling, clinical detachment. He was a man who, having lost the game, had simply folded his cards and accepted the consequences. As he was led from the house, his gaze met Sir Alister's for a fleeting moment. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a final, contemptuous judgment. Poirot and I prepared for our departure, our presence no longer required. The house, which had been a crucible of simmering tension, now felt hollowed out, a place of ghosts and echoes. Before we left, Poirot had a final word with the survivors of the tragedy. We found Sir Alister in the great hall, shrunken in his vast chair, staring into a dead fireplace. The fire of his own tyrannical spirit seemed to have been extinguished along with it. The twin revelations, that his prize had sought to deceive him, and his guardian had sought to murder for him, had broken something fundamental within him. He was no longer a collector of beautiful things, merely a custodian of a cold, empty museum. Your obsession, Sir Alister, it was a dangerous thing. You sought to own a voice, a thing of beauty that can only exist when it is free. In building a cage for it, you created the conditions for its destruction. The old man did not seem to hear him. He just stared into the ashes, a man already entombed in his own mausoleum. We found Lady Beatrice and Eleanor Vance together in the morning room, standing by the window, looking out at the gardens where their foolish, desperate plot had been born. They were no longer mistress and companion, but two women bound together by a shared ordeal. The future for them was uncertain, but in the ruins of the household they had found a strange, sorrowful solidarity. Your lies, mesdames, they nearly allowed a killer to escape, Poirot told them, his tone of gentle admonishment. Fear is a poor architect. To build a new life, you must not use the crooked bricks of the past. You must find the courage to use the truth, however plain and difficult it may be. Lady Beatrice met his gaze, and for the first time I saw not fear in her eyes, but a flicker of resolve. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. Julian Finch was the last. We found him in the dining room, a glass of morning sherry in his hand, surveying the room as if measuring for new curtains. In the grim arithmetic of the affair, he was the sole beneficiary. His inheritance was now secure. "Well, Poirot," he said with a cynical twist of his lips, "it seems I owe you a vote of thanks. You've tidied things up quite nicely." Poirot regarded him with a look of profound distaste. "What you have gained, monsieur, you have gained through tragedy and death. Take care that the inheritance is not poisoned also." He turned his back on the young man without another word. As Maclay drove us away from the manor in the gleaming Rolls-Royce, the house grew smaller in the distance, a grim granite fortress receding into the vast, indifferent beauty of the landscape. I was filled with an immense sense of relief, the feeling of a diver returning to the surface after a long, dangerous plunge into the dark. Poirot was silent for some time, his eyes closed as he rested his little gray cells. Finally he spoke. "It was, you see, Hastings, a problem of order. Everything in this sad affair came down to a perversion of order. Sir Alister sought to impose his own tyrannical order on the life and art of another. The two women, in their fear, attempted to create a disorderly deception to escape that tyranny. And the doctor was the most interesting of all." "He was a monster," I said with a shudder. "But of course," Poirot agreed. "But his monstrosity wore the mask of logic and control. He was a man who worshipped a sterile, perfect order in all things. You saw it in the arrangement of his medical bag. I am certain we would have seen it in his collection of moths, each specimen perfectly pinned, perfectly labeled, fixed for all time in a state of lifeless order. He managed Sir Alister's life with that same clinical precision. Genevieve Croft, she was a force of chaos, a thing of passion, of unpredictable living art. She threatened the doctor's perfect profitable arrangement. And so he did to her what he did to his butterflies. He put a pin through her and fixed her to his board. The murder in his mind was not an act of passion, it was an act of housekeeping. He was simply restoring order. And the clues, I reflected, that little brooch was the key. No, Hastings, he corrected me gently. The brooch was not the key to the murder. It was the key to the first lie. It allowed us to dismantle the story Mademoiselle Vance had constructed. We had to understand the foolish comedy before we could unmask the tragedienne who was hiding behind it. The most important clues in this house were not the physical objects, but the emotions, the vanity of one man, the fear of his wife, the loyalty of her friend, the greed of the nephew, and finally, the cold, boundless ambition of the doctor. Always, Hastings, you must look there first, for the truth of a crime is found not in the method, but in the heart of the one who commits it. We arrived at the small, wind-swept station at Invergary. The London train was waiting, puffing steam into the crisp Highland air. As we stood on the platform, I expressed my admiration for his brilliant handling of the case. He accepted my praise with a small, satisfied nod. He looked around the rustic platform, at the peeling paint on the station house, and the slightly grimy window of the waiting room, and the familiar look of fastidious displeasure crossed his face. "Eh bien," he said, adjusting his muffler with a precise tug. "Enough of these grand passions and wild landscapes, Hastings. This Scotland, it is altogether too dramatic for my taste." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "I long for the perfect, reassuring symmetry of a well-laid breakfast table in London."